Welcome to Civics in a Year, the podcast that makes civic literacy fast, accessible, and surprisingly engaging. In just 10 minutes an episode, we'll tackle one of 250 essential questions about American democracy, how it works, why it matters, and what it means for you. Whether you're a student, a teacher, or just someone who wants to better understand your country and your rights, you're in the right place. Civics in a Year is powered by the Civic Literacy Curriculum from the Center for American Civics and is produced in partnership with the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University. Welcome back to Civics in a Year. Today, I am so honored to be joined by Clint Smith, the #1 New York Times bestselling author of How the Word Is Passed, A Reckoning with the History of Slavery Across America. The book won the National Book Critics Circle Award for Nonfiction. It was named one of the New York Times best books of 2021. Clint is also the author of bestselling poetry collection, Above Ground, and award-winning Counting Descent. In addition to his writing, he's a staff writer at The Atlantic, where his work explores history, memory, education, and the ways the past continues to shape American life today. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about Juneteenth, historical memory, and what it means to reckon honestly with the American story. Clint, thank you so much for joining us on Civics in a Year.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So in your work, you often connect history to memory and storytelling. Why do you think Juneteenth remained unknown to so many Americans for so long? And what changes when we start to tell these stories more publicly?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of reasons why Juneteenth wasn't known to many people. I think in part because it began as a uniquely Texas tradition and a uniquely Black American Texas tradition. And so the history of Juneteenth is that the Emancipation Proclamation was signed January 1st, 1863, and that ostensibly freed all the enslaved people in the Confederate States. But obviously, Union soldiers could only enforce that if they had sort of conquered the territory and defeated Confederate soldiers in these various states across the South. And so they had not yet made their way to Texas, or had not yet fully taken over Texas in various parts of Texas. And so word often had not even reached Texas that the Emancipation Proclamation had been signed. And if it had reached Texas, it had not necessarily reached the enslaved people of Texas. And often you hear these stories of enslavers who were made aware of the fact that the Emancipation Proclamation had been signed. And even 2 years after that, that General Lee of the Confederacy had surrendered at Appomattox, effectively ending the Civil War. But both in the context of the Emancipation Proclamation and in the context of the end of the war at Appomattox, that information was purposefully kept on many occasions from enslaved Black people so that these enslavers could continue to exploit their labor, could continue to keep them functionally enslaved even after slavery had essentially been nullified. And so this tradition, as Union troops moved into Texas on June 19th, 1865, Gordon Granger, who was the general of the Union Army in that location, he communicated to, the 250,000 enslaved Black people in Texas that, in fact, you are free. And this spread across the state. Not necessarily on a single day. It wasn't the case that on June 19th, every single enslaved person in Texas knew they were free. It had to pass from plantation to plantation, from mouth to mouth, from ear to ear. But there began to be these celebrations in Texas of this day that Gordon Granger made this announcement, made this proclamation, gave his general order, and that became a uniquely Texas tradition. And then as Black people from Texas moved to different places across the country, that tradition, that Juneteenth tradition, spread with them. And into the 20th century, it sort of ebbed and flowed. There was some places where it was celebrated very robustly and some places where it wasn't. But in the 1970s, Texas legislator it made it or advocated for Juneteenth to become a state holiday, and that brought more attention to it in a state sanctioned way, and ultimately got it sort of gained traction county by county, state by state, and so it in many ways it is considered to be the sort of Independence Day of Black Americans. For many Black Americans, Juneteenth is the moment in which we celebrate meaningfully and functionally our independence in this country in a way that feels often more meaningful than July 4th. And so that's one end. And then on the other side is the fact that so much Black history, as we know, and as your podcast so beautifully and powerfully describes, has been kept from us. And there has often been an intentional effort to erase, to sidestep, to misremember the history of Black life, and specifically as it relates to slavery and emancipation, in order to because there's an understanding that if you prevent people from understanding the history of this country, then you can further legitimize the sort of contemporary landscape of inequality, because people are not then able to fully draw the connections between things that have happened in the past and the manifestations of those past actions in the present.
And I'm glad you brought that up. One of my favorite words that I have learned is something called reflective patriotism, right? Celebrating our country, but also understanding that it is not this perfect thing. And that's why the founders utilized the word more perfect. They never said perfect. So Juneteenth is, as you said, is both the celebration, but also a reminder of delayed freedom. What can people learn from that tension between the promise of liberty and the reality of how long it took to reach everyone? I think students might be listening to this and thinking, we get information so fast now, but this information took years to really get to the country. How do we kind of learn from that tension?
I mean, I'm so glad you framed it that way. And that's it. I mean, that's the thing is, America is a place that has provided unparalleled, unimaginable opportunities for millions of people across generations in ways that their own ancestors could have never imagined. It has also done so at the direct expense of millions and millions of other people who have been intergenerationally subjugated and oppressed. And both of those things are the story of America. It's not one over here or one over there. You get to pick this one and not pick that one. Both of those things are the story of this country. And I talk to students and teachers all the time, and the way that I say it is like, I'm a person who's done things in my life that I am proud of, and I've also done things in my life that I'm not proud of, because I'm human and I make mistakes. And the type of person that I try to be in the world, and the way I try to raise my children, and the way I try to be in community with friends and neighbors and loved ones, is not to pretend as if I've never made a mistake. It's not to ignore those mistakes. It's not to sidestep them. It's to confront them, to acknowledge them, and to learn from them so that I don't make those same mistakes in the future. And so if that's the standard I hold myself to, if that's the standard I hold my children to, why would that not be the same standard I hold this country to, right? Why would we not understand the both-andedness of who we are as a country in the same way we understand the both-andedness of ourselves? And I think Juneteenth in so many ways is a perfect microcosm of that both-andedness, because it is both this incredible moment to celebrate the freedom of millions of enslaved people, 250 some odd years of slavery. Slavery existed longer in this country than it hasn't. And so it is so essential for us to lift up that history and to celebrate it, and for it to be a moment, a day of jubilation and celebration. And simultaneously, it is a day of mourning. It is a day to reflect on the millions of enslaved people who fought for a freedom they never got a chance to see. It is a moment to think about how violent and insidious it was for not only people to participate in slavery, but to then keep information of one's freedom from enslaved people. Like there were people who were free, who died not knowing that they had been freed. And so when we think about Juneteenth, we have to hold all that is worthy of celebration and all that is worthy of mourning. When we think about this country that we live in and that we love, we think about all that is worthy of celebration and all that is worthy of mourning. And I think that that shouldn't be an ideological notion. It shouldn't be political contention. It's it's one that is reflective of what it means to be human, of what it means to be American. And I think young people understand that intuitively. It's us grown-ups that come and mess it up for them because we're so caught up in our own ideological predispositions that we go back and misrepresent and often misunderstand for ourselves what this history means.
So you've written about the importance of place and historical memory, and I think that's how I connected so much with how the word is passed. Is you take us on these journeys to these places. How should communities think about commemorating Juneteenth in ways that go beyond this single day celebration and really help people engage more deeply with this big American history?
So Juneteenth has been national holiday for a few years now.
Mhm.
And there are some people who have concerns that it may become commodified and rendered a sort of product of capitalism in the way that some other American holidays have been. You can come get your, used car for 25% off on Juneteenth Day, or you can,
Mhm.
here's a special, Juneteenth menu at the deli. There's all sorts of ways in
Yeah.
which every holiday can become monetized, commodified, and made to serve these sort of whims of capitalism broadly defined. I think that Juneteenth becoming a national holiday is such an important moment. And the first thing I think about when I think about that is the decades and decades of activism that it took from Black Texans in particular, who have been celebrating this in their churches, in their neighborhoods, in their homes for generations, and who have recognized the importance of there being a day to celebrate the emancipation of slavery. There's no other day on the American calendar where we collectively celebrate the abolition of one of the worst things that certainly in our history, but in world history that have ever been done. And so simply for that fact alone, I also think it's worthy of being lifted up because it reflects the intergenerational tenacity and ongoing commitment and resilience of people who were fighting to make us cognizant of this history, even when so few people wanted to pay attention to it, especially outside of the Black community. A thing that I think about all the time is how the first enslaved people came to the British colonies that would become the United States in 1619. And the Emancipation Proclamation was not signed until 1863. Civil War didn't end until 1865. But from the moment enslaved people arrived on these shores, they were fighting for freedom. They were fighting for liberation. They were fighting for emancipation. What that also means is that the vast majority of people who fought for freedom never got a chance to experience it for themselves. But they fought for it anyway, because they knew that someday someone would. And I always think about how my life is only possible, how my children's lives are only possible, because of generations of people who fought for something they knew they might never see, but who fought for it anyway, because they knew that someday someone would. And I think about what sort of responsibility does that bestow upon me? Does that bestow upon all of us to attempt to build the sort of world that we might not see ourselves, but to try to build it anyway, because we know that someday someone will. And it's almost like we're all chipping away at this wall. And you don't know if the wall is 6 inches thick or 6,000 miles thick. But what you know is that the more you chip away at it, the less the people who come after you will have to chip away at. And I think that that's what keeps me going. That's what, again, that for me, that is the Juneteenth tradition. The Juneteenth tradition is this recognition that Juneteenth exists because of generations of people who fought to make that moment of abolition possible, right? It wasn't just Abraham Lincoln signing the Emancipation Proclamation. It was generations and generations of Black Americans and some white Americans who worked in order to make it so that this country had to fully confront what it had done to millions and millions of Black people. And it is this moment to recognize that there is a tradition that created Juneteenth, and then there's a tradition that is built upon Juneteenth. And we are part of that tradition that is building on that history. And it is our responsibility to do what the generations who preceded 1865 did in order to get where we need to go, and to accept, again, that we might not see it. And it can be hard, especially in really in political moments that are rife with despair, to feel, sometimes you feel like things aren't moving, and you can even feel like things are moving backwards. But if you just remember that, like, the only way we get to the other side of that wall is to chip away and chip away and chip away, the same way so many folks in this country have done for generations. That's the only way we get where we need to go. And that's what was done for us. So that's what it's our job to do.
And my last question for you, if, as again, you said, this just became a national holiday and really on the front of people's minds recently. If I, as a lifelong learner or as a student, want to learn a little bit more, where could I start? Where is like a good, besides listening to this podcast, if you're listening to this podcast, your access point is open.
Yeah.
What are some other ways that people can just start to learn more about this history and this holiday?
Annette Gordon-Reed, who's a law professor at Harvard University and an incredible historian, and is probably the foremost scholar on Jefferson and his relationship to slavery, has an excellent book that came out a few years ago called Juneteenth, which sort of outlines both the political history and her own family's personal history as it relates to the holiday. And it's an excellent primer on what Juneteenth is and what it has meant to so many people. In my own book, How the Word Is Passed, I have a chapter about Juneteenth and the place, Galveston, Texas, where yes, Juneteenth was founded, which was so, for me, I the thing I love about books, and we were talking about this before the podcast started, like books for me are what this podcast is for you. It's this excuse to learn and to teach ourselves this history that we didn't necessarily know. And so I feel so grateful to have been able to spend time with folks who are the descendants of those who were there when Gordon Granger made that announcement that all slaves were free. And it was so powerful to be in the room with them on that day, on that land, in that place. And I'll think about that day and those conversations for the rest of my life. And we're also fortunate that there are incredible online resources now. There are some incredible documentaries, I think some that have been produced by PBS. You can find all sorts of examples on YouTube. And if you're interested in the Black history more broadly, not to shamelessly plug my own stuff again, but I have
please do.
I have a podcast, or excuse me, I have a YouTube series called Crash Course Black American History, which is about 50 episodes going from 1619 to 2020 about the history of Black life in this country, meaningful moments, meaningful people, and also some people that aren't necessarily in the pantheon of Black life, both trying to lift up the stories of those who are on our proverbial Mount Rushmore, and also the stories of some ordinary folks who have done extraordinary work.
And every student listening to this went, yep, I have seen a crash course. I know that. So listeners, I will have all of this stuff linked in. And I really do. And this is a wholehearted thing. If you look back at my Instagram in 2021, I had posted about this book and talked about the storytelling. And again, I love that you took us on this journey with you. And it really made me, as a learner and as an Arizonan who sometimes feels like this history is far removed, but it really isn't. It makes me really consider places I'm at and people who have been there and stories that I'm not hearing. So highly suggest this book. I cannot enough. I mean, you said Dr. Annette Gordon read her book, The Hemmingses of Monticello, is absolutely one of my favorite books. She is incredible. I also want to say Isabel Wilkerson. Her books, again, for me, Juneteenth is a time to unlearn a lot of things that I thought I knew or, I was told, and to really just dig into this. And I really appreciate too, Clint, that you talk about the human aspect, right? As humans, we make mistakes. America has made mistakes, but it's also done really good things. Both of those things can exist. And in this time of America 250 and reflective patriotism, having all of that is so important. But I just can't thank you enough for being on our podcast, for sharing your work, for sharing your words with us on this holiday of Juneteenth.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Civics in a Year. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and share it with someone who cares about a constitutional republic as much as you do. For more episodes, resources, and updates, follow us on social media or visit us at civics.asu.edu. Make sure to check out the show notes for any relevant links. Special thanks to the United States Marine Band for their performance of the Stars and Stripes Forever. Let's keep building a stronger constitutional republic, one episode at a time.